Number 9. Yoma Fouad. In 2017, a self-proclaimed prostitute from New Jersey named Yoma Fouad was arrested in Miami for allegedly stealing $32,000 worth of valuables from a man's home. Fouad met the victim, Alain René Galette, at a nightclub and accompanied him to his home, where a massage quickly turned into more. Galette awoke hours later and realized that his Rolex, cash, jewelry, and other valuables were missing. Fouad was also nowhere in sight, and Galette began to suspect that he had been drugged and robbed. Police soon caught up with Fouad, who was accused of stealing over $100,000 worth of items from numerous victims over a 2-year span beginning in 2015. To avoid capture, she routinely changed her appearance after committing a crime. Fouad served a 1-year sentence at a Miami jail for the Florida robberies. Shortly after her release, she was extradited to New York City to face charges for a string of thefts she allegedly committed during the same 2-year time period when she robbed men in Florida. While the outcome of her more recent court case is unclear, records show that she is not currently incarcerated in New York. Number 8. Monica De Jesus and Justin Harris. During the early morning hours one day in April 2017, police in Chester County, Pennsylvania, responded to a call about a robbery at a home in East Goshen Township. The victims told police that a gun-toting intruder, later identified as 36-year-old Justin Harris, had kicked in their door. One of the 2 residents at the home managed to overpower Harris by hitting him in the face with a fireplace poker, while another household member called 911. Meanwhile, a second suspect, 22-year-old Monica De Jesus, allegedly picked up the gun and pointed it in their direction. The suspects eventually fled the scene but were tracked down and arrested a short while later. Police found the victim's stolen property in their possession. De Jesus initially claimed that one of the men who lived at the home had forced himself on her, but investigators found evidence that she was a prostitute who had traveled to the residence from Philadelphia to meet a client. She was allegedly angry because the client didn't pay. According to authorities, De Jesus left the house and called Harris, who was waiting in a nearby parking lot, and the pair returned to the home to collect what they felt was owed to them. They were charged with a litany of crimes, including robbery, burglary, aggravated assault, simple assault, prostitution, making terroristic threats, theft by unlawful taking, receiving stolen property, criminal conspiracy, and harassment. Number 7. Kyle Walker. During the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, British pro soccer player Kyle Walker put his foot in his mouth in one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Just hours after violating social distancing policies by bringing prostitutes into his home, he posted a statement on Instagram urging people to follow lockdown rules. Of course, at the time, the public was unaware of what he had been up to the previous night. Walker was called out on his hypocrisy less than 2 weeks later when one of the hired women, 21-year-old Louise McNamara, told the UK Sun about the gathering. She said that Walker and a friend paid her and a Portuguese courtesan around $2,700 for their services, and that they left at 2 in the morning after spending around 3.5 hours at the residence. McNamara said that Walker tried to conceal his identity during the meeting, but his friend slipped by calling him Kai and mentioning that he was a soccer player. She discreetly snapped a photo of the pro footballer paying her, which she later turned over to the media as proof of the encounter. Walker publicly apologized for his actions, which happened during what appeared to be a downward spiral toward rock bottom. Just months earlier, he broke up with his girlfriend after getting another woman pregnant. In the weeks after the prostitute incident, he was accused of violating lockdown restrictions on multiple occasions, including by taking a walk with his neighbors. In May 2023, Walker allegedly exposed himself to a woman at a club, but was not criminally charged, and he's managed to keep his career intact despite his controversial behavior. Number 6. Monica Fowry. In October 2015, a 34-year-old military wife named Monica Fowry was devastated to learn that her husband was cheating on her. Fowry's Royal Marine husband, Wouter, came clean about his affair with a younger woman named Hannah Stokes, who he had met about a month earlier. Crushed by the news, Monica left the couple's home in the English city of Plymouth to spend the night with some friends and process her new reality. Monica, who was born in Poland, met her South African-born husband at a pub in Germany in 2004. She fell hard for Wouter and was still deeply in love with him 13 years later when he returned from a military training exercise in the United States and admitted to his infidelity. Simply put, Monica was blindsided by the confession. She didn't see it coming, even though Wouter had been acting increasingly distant in recent weeks in an effort to push her away. The heartbroken housewife was already in a poor mental state when she returned home the next day and walked in to find Stokes in her marital bed, at which point she lost all self-control. Monica poured boiling water over Hannah's head and chest, causing serious burns and permanent hearing damage as the young woman screamed in agonizing pain and begged her attacker to stop. Wouter overheard the commotion and rushed into the room, where he found his wife grabbing his mistress by the hair. Authorities arrested Monica on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. During her trial, she claimed that she didn't remember committing the attack, but expressed deep remorse for her actions. Monica's supporters and even the judge acknowledged that her violent behavior was completely out of character. Those who knew Monica personally described her as an upstanding person who they would have never pictured ending up in a situation like this. No matter how well liked she was, however, it didn't change the fact that she had caused serious damage to someone's life. Hannah Stokes testified about the excruciating pain and indescribable fear she experienced during the attack and her continued suffering afterward. She admitted that she made a poor decision by having an affair with a married man, but said that she didn't think she deserved to suffer from lifelong injuries for her mistake. A jury found Monica guilty as charged, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She and Wouter are now divorced, and the relationship between Wouter and Stokes is also over. Number 5. The world's laziest cheater. In 2022, a woman named Amy revealed that she had awoken to her husband being intimate with another woman in the very same bed. She told iHeartRadio's talk program Will and Woody for the drive home that her husband had brought a woman home earlier that night and introduced her as a friend. He said that the guest had nowhere to go and asked if she could crash on the couch. At that point, Amy and her husband had been together for 24 years. She trusted him and had no reason to suspect that he was being dishonest, and she welcomed the woman into their home. As it turned out, the so-called friend was actually Amy's husband's mistress, and he was apparently daring enough to go at it with the woman while Amy was asleep, presumably thinking that they could get away with it if they were quiet enough. The talk show's hosts were stunned that Amy's husband hadn't chosen a more discreet location for the encounter. While only the cheater himself knows the answer to that question, the circumstances led to him being labeled as the world's laziest cheater. By the time Amy went public with her experience, she had moved past it emotionally. She said that in the end, it worked out for the best because she ended the marriage and found someone she was incredibly happy with. It's unclear what her ex-husband is up to these days or what happened with the relationship with his mistress. Number 4. Christina Joy Rivera. In what was later described as a booty call gone wrong, a Florida man named Ronald Koch was in the middle of getting busy with a female guest one morning in 2017 when his ex barged into his St. Petersburg home. The suspect, 27-year-old Christina Joy Rivera, was accused of forcing her way into the residence at around 5:00 a.m. and attacking Koch's new girlfriend, Julie Thomas. According to an arrest report, Rivera entered the bedroom without saying a word and began punching Thomas in the face. Responding deputies arrived to find Thomas bleeding and suffering from minor injuries. Koch told police that he had received text messages from Rivera shortly before the incident, asking if she could come over and expressing her desire for intimacy. He ignored the messages, and instead of taking it as a hint that Koch wasn't interested in seeing her, Rivera allegedly showed up uninvited. The accused intruder denied the assault and told law enforcement that she had been invited over to the residence, but deputies didn't buy the story. Just months after serving time in jail for a DUI charge involving property damage, Rivera was booked into custody on suspicion of burglary with assault or battery. She also had prior convictions for marijuana possession, theft, public urination, and violating probation. While the outcome of Rivera's case is unclear, it's probably safe to assume that her status as a repeat offender didn't do her any favors with the judge who oversaw the booty call case. Number 3. Community punishes cheating husband. When a woman in southern China found out that her husband was cheating on her in November 2020, civilians decided to take justice into her own hands. In a shocking encounter that was captured on camera, 4 men barged into the man's home while he was in bed with his mistress. They strapped the partially dressed philanderer into a cage and tossed it into a nearby river. The practice, which loosely translates to dip in a pig cage, was commonly carried out during ancient times as an unofficial form of punishment against adulterers. It was traditionally performed with the intention of drowning the cheating party, but in this particular case, police were alerted to the situation in time to rescue the man. By the time the story broke, authorities had arrested 4 suspects and an investigation into the incident was underway. Unfortunately, the story seems to both start and end there, and it's unclear whether the suspects were convicted of any crimes. Number 2. Tyre Russell. Shortly before dawn one day in August 2019, a panicked man entered a Woodbury, New Jersey police station and said he had just escaped from his burning house. He was half-dressed, covered in soot from head to toe, and suffering from first and second-degree burns as he coughed and gasped for air. Firefighters rushed to the scene, where they rescued the man's dog and doused the blaze. A search of the victim's phone quickly pointed investigators in the direction of 29-year-old Tyre Russell, who the victim described as his side chick. The man had invited Russell over to his home earlier that day for a booty call, but had fallen asleep by the time she called him back. His phone contained 8 recent missed calls from Russell, along with rage-filled text messages wishing death on the victim and accusing him of wasting Russell's money by inviting her over and not answering the door. According to law enforcement, security footage from a nearby gas station showed Russell buying lighter fluid, matches, and a lighter shortly before the fire. She was also reportedly captured on camera as she returned to the residence and approached the back door. Just minutes later, the house was engulfed in flames. By the time the victim awoke to the smoke and flames, it was impossible for him to simply walk out the door. He escaped through a window and hightailed it to the police station. Russell was charged with aggravated arson, aggravated assault, endangering with a substantial risk of death, and criminal mischief. Number 1. Karl Deutsch. 50-year-old Karl Deutsch and his girlfriend were getting busy in the bedroom at his Pennsylvania apartment one day in 2011 when state police raided the home. Armed with a warrant, law enforcement was looking for evidence that Deutsch had been manufacturing methamphetamine inside the residence. Deutsch claimed that the bust caught him completely off guard. He later told the judge overseeing his case that he scrambled to cover himself while police allegedly forced him to the floor and stomped on his leg. During his court proceedings, he accused the cops of stomping on his leg and breaking it, causing injuries that led to a staph infection and required multiple reconstructive surgeries. Law enforcement denied attacking Deutsch and accused him of trying to disarm officers twice during the arrest. The police also claimed that they warned the defendant about the impending raid from outside using a loudspeaker. Deutsch continued to dispute these assertions, arguing that he wouldn't have been naked in bed with his girlfriend if the police had announced that they were about to enter the home. Throughout the case, the judge seemed to notice the defendant's tendency to blame others and shirk his responsibility for the messy situations he landed himself in. She had a hard time believing Deutsch's claim that he didn't use methamphetamine, especially since the police found chemicals for making the drug inside his house during the raid. The judge was also unswayed by his allegation that a prescription medication caused him to falsely test positive for drugs. Deutsch pleaded no contest to 2 counts of conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamine and was sentenced to just under a year in jail. Number 13. A double dose of revenge porn. Most revenge porn crimes are committed electronically, but one Louisiana woman allegedly decided to go the old-fashioned route in 2020 by mailing intimate photos of 2 individuals to over 24 people. According to the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office, 32-year-old Sarah D. Faris of Sulphur had access to one of the victim's personal information. She was accused of sending degrading letters about the man to at least 30 people, along with copies of his nude photos, and traveling to Texas to mail the letters. Sheriff's Deputy Stitch Gullery told local station Fox 29 that the victim was contacted by multiple people about the letters. The man realized that Faris had access to his social media account because she had helped him set it up years earlier. After learning about Faris's alleged revenge plot, authorities charged her with 150 counts of non-consensual disclosure of a private image. She was released on a $75,000 bond later that day, but soon ended up back in custody on even more charges. Just weeks after her first arrest, Faris was accused of including photos of not one, but two victims in the perverted pamphlets that she sent in the mail. She was charged with another 30 counts of non-consensual disclosure of a private image. Faris was freed on a $15,000 bond and scheduled to return to court at a later date. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 12. Hilda Nordhoek. 27-year-old Robert Miller arrived at his Wichita, Kansas home one day in 2018 to find a screen door ripped off its hinges, a smashed mailbox, and a window that had been shattered by a brick. Inside, he found his beloved dog beaten to death. Police initially failed to identify a suspect, but continued to investigate the case. In the meantime, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, better known as PETA, offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the identification and arrest of the person responsible. Miller was devastated by the loss of his 10-year-old American bulldog, who he called Buffalo Boy. Nearly a year later, in early 2019, police charged 30-year-old Hilda Nordhoek in connection with the crime after identifying her through surveillance footage and a license plate reader program. Prosecutors claimed that the woman had a romantic past with Miller and accused her of killing his dog in a jealous rage. In 2021, Nordhoek pleaded no contest to animal cruelty, theft, and burglary, and was sentenced to 30 days in jail plus 2 years of probation. While handing down the sentence, the judge issued a stern warning that if she violated the terms of her probation, she would automatically be required to serve 13 months in prison for burglary, plus 12 months in county lockup for animal cruelty. Number 11. Candace Nicole Jones and Edward Brannon Barry. 10 days after 34-year-old mother of two Emily Hacker vanished in early 2017, her body was found in a shallow grave in rural Burleson County, Texas. The contents of the burial were burned in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence, but the medical examiner was able to conclude that the young woman died from blunt force injuries. Investigators quickly discovered that Hacker had been recently pulled over by the police for a routine traffic stop. While searching her vehicle, officers found a gun. Hacker told the cops that the weapon wasn't hers and that it belonged to 32-year-old Candace Nicole Jones of Rockdale. Detectives theorized that Jones murdered Hacker for ratting her out to the police. She and 4 other suspects, including 32-year-old Edward Brannon Barry, were arrested in connection with Hacker's death. Jones and Barry were each charged with 1 count of capital murder. Jones and Brannon both pleaded guilty and were sentenced to 50 years in prison. As part of their plea agreements, they waived their right to appeal their cases. According to records, they will both become eligible for parole in 2042, and their latest release date is in 2067. Number 10. Yasmin Walker. A very unfortunate British man was enjoying a movie at the cinema one day in 2021 when he began receiving text messages informing him that his nude photo had been posted on social media. His ex-girlfriend, 30-year-old Yasmin Walker, had shared the intimate snapshot with her 1,300 followers, along with a sarcastic comment asking, "What the bleep is that?" followed by a laughing emoji. The victim begged Walker to delete the post. She finally complied when the man threatened to call the police, but by then, the damage was done. Authorities charged Walker with disclosing a private photo with the intent to cause distress. Walker claimed that she posted the photo by accident and blamed her poor vision for clicking the wrong button. During her trial, her attorney argued that his client suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from multiple abusive relationships, although none of those relationships were with the victim in the revenge porn case. In fact, Walker claimed that her vision was bad because of injuries that an ex-boyfriend caused during an attack. The defendant's lawyer also told the court that Walker suffered from a nearly decade-long marijuana habit and that she was trying to kick the habit for good. While the judge took these factors into consideration, he also thought that it was important to sentence Walker appropriately for her actions and to set an example by imposing a punishment that showed that this type of crime will not be tolerated. Walker received a 3-month reduced prison sentence in what the judge described as a short, sharp shock so that people know revenge pornography means prison. Number 9. Kenesha Rice and Sheldon Johnson. 39-year-old Kenyana Edwards made the fateful decision to drive drunk after leaving a nightclub in early 2023. She drove the wrong way along a Las Vegas highway and collided with another car at 2:30 in the morning. Edwards and the other driver both died at the scene. A toxicology test later revealed that Edwards' blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit when she got behind the wheel, and she also had cocaine and marijuana in her system. Tragedy struck again the very next day when Edwards' boyfriend, 35-year-old Martin Loftus, was found dead in his apartment with multiple gunshot wounds. Evidence at the scene suggested that the shooter had followed Loftus down a hallway as he tried to run into a bedroom to hide. Based on witnesses' description of a vehicle that was seen leaving the apartment complex, along with other pieces of evidence, investigators identified the suspected killers as Kenyana Edwards' brother, 34-year-old Sheldon Johnson, and his girlfriend, 36-year-old Kenesha Rice. According to police, Johnson had made posts on social media implying that he blamed Loftus for his sister's death. He also allegedly alluded to his plans to murder Loftus as revenge for Edwards' death. Johnson and Rice were arrested in California and extradited to Las Vegas, where they each faced charges of open murder, conspiracy to commit murder, burglary, and conspiracy to commit burglary. Number 8. David Crawford. Investigators in 6 counties across Maryland spent 2 decades trying to solve a string of nearly a dozen arsons that started during the early 2000s and resulted in multiple families losing their homes and/or vehicles. Several of the fires were set when the victims were asleep in the middle of the night. Miraculously, all of the families who were targeted in the years-long crime spree managed to escape the flames without physical injury. Law enforcement wasn't even sure if all the crimes were connected until 2020, when they discovered evidence in the aftermath of yet another arson that finally led them to a suspect. The victims had a history of disagreements with former Laurel Police Chief David Crawford, who had retired back in 2010. A closer look into previous cases revealed even more connections between Crawford and past victims, who all had a history of issues with the former top cop. The targets included former colleagues, a chiropractor, and even Crawford's stepson. Evidence at the crime scenes showed a repeated pattern of the culprit using gasoline as an accelerant, and at least one of the crimes was captured on home surveillance footage. During a search of Crawford's home in 2021, investigators found evidence further connecting him to the crimes, including a list of targets. And while they were able to connect Crawford to the crime using forensic evidence, his grudges against the victims proved to be the big break in the case that led to the rest of the discoveries pointing toward his possible guilt. The accused serial arsonist was finally arrested in March of 2021. He was charged with 58 counts in 4 different counties, including Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Frederick County, and Howard County. Following a months-long trial in early 2023, a Howard County judge convicted Crawford of 8 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 3 counts of arson, and 1 count of malicious burning in connection with 3 separate arsons. He received 8 life sentences, 6 of which are to be served concurrently, plus 75 years behind bars. As long as the conviction and sentence stand, the 71-year-old will never be released from prison. Crawford has maintained his innocence throughout the case and continues to do so as he awaits trial in various other counties. He plans to appeal his conviction despite facing at least 4 more attempted murder charges and at least 3 counts of first-degree arson. Number 7. Michael Keatley. A group of 6 men were playing cards and drinking beer outside a home in Ruskin, Florida on Thanksgiving Day in 2010 when a minivan pulled up to the property. Armed with a shotgun and wearing a shirt that said Sheriff on it, the driver exited the vehicle and told the men he was looking for someone who went by the nickname Creeper. The group knew Creeper but he wasn't at the gathering. Suddenly, the armed visitor ordered everyone to the ground. Believing that he was a real cop, the friends followed the man's orders. But he wasn't a police officer, and he proceeded to shoot the men one by one, killing 28-year-old Juan Gutron and his 22-year-old brother Sergio Gutron. The other 4 victims survived their injuries. Police were initially at a loss to identify the suspect, who fled the scene before law enforcement arrived. A few days after the shooting, an informant told investigators that a local ice cream man, Michael Keatley, had recently been talking about his plans to get revenge on a pair of thieves who had robbed and opened fire on him 11 months earlier. The masked gunman shot Keatley 5 times, leaving him permanently disabled, and made off with $12 that they stole from his truck. Keatley had mistakenly suspected Creeper of being one of the thieves, when in reality none of his 6 victims had anything to do with the robbery. As it turned out, they were targeted in a disturbing case of mistaken identity. Authorities arrested Keatley several days after the crime, and he spent the next decade languishing in jail until the case went to trial in 2020. His defense attorneys argued that he was medically incapable of committing the crime due to his injuries from being shot months earlier. They also accused the police of carrying out a faulty investigation, which they described as nothing short of a nightmare. The first trial ended in a mistrial, and the case dragged on for 3 more years. In 2023, more than 12 years after the shooting, a second jury found Keatley guilty of 2 counts of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 6 concurrent life terms without the chance of parole, and he reportedly plans to appeal his case. Number 6. Seoul subway slaying. While working for the Seoul Metro system in South Korea's capital in 2019, Jeon Ju-hwan expressed an interest in a 28-year-old female co-worker. The woman rejected his advances, but he refused to take no for an answer. Instead of respectfully backing off, Jeon persisted in his attempts to woo his colleague, calling her more than 300 times and begging her to date him. When she continued to turn him down, the crazed admirer threatened to hurt himself. Over time, Jeon's behavior escalated from annoying to terrifying as his stalking campaign became increasingly aggressive. He even installed a hidden camera in a workplace bathroom and threatened to blackmail his co-worker with the videos he captured. After dealing with the unwanted advances for 2 years, the victim reported Jeon to the police in 2021. She filed a second complaint a few months later. Authorities charged Jeon with stalking, illegal filming, and threatening, and he was fired from his job. Prosecutors attempted to detain Jeon pending the outcome of his case, but they failed to obtain the court's approval to hold him in custody due to his low risk of fleeing. No order of protection was issued for the victim, who was essentially left to deal with the situation on her own as Jeon continued to terrorize her. After being convicted in connection with the woman's first complaint and sentenced to 9 years in prison, Jeon appealed his case. He remained free even as he continued to harass and intimidate the victim, including with demands to settle his criminal case in a way that was favorable to him. On the day before Jeon was scheduled to be resentenced, he hid inside the employee bathroom wearing a swim cap and rubber gloves and waited for his co-worker to enter. He brutally stabbed the woman to death at the end of her shift, sparking widespread public outrage over the missed opportunities to prevent the tragedy from happening in the first place. Jeon admitted that he killed his victim as an act of revenge for getting him in trouble with the law. When the woman refused to settle his criminal case, he became intent on murdering her. The obsessed killer was convicted of murder. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, but the court sentenced Jeon to 40 years in prison, followed by 15 years on an ankle monitor. The woman's murder happened right around the same time South Korea implemented a new anti-stalking law, and yet the policy failed to protect her. In response to nationwide protests, the country's president, Yoon Suk-yeol, ordered the Justice Ministry to improve the legislation. Lawmakers removed a clause that previously banned authorities from prosecuting suspects without a victim's consent, which arguably put victims at risk of retaliation from the accused. Stalking suspects are also now required to wear an ankle monitor even before sentencing. These long overdue changes came amid a years-long battle to improve legal protections for victims of gender-based violence in South Korea. And while many activists continue to campaign for additional improvements, the heightened policies mark a major step in the right direction toward keeping victims safe and holding perpetrators accountable. Number 5. Jake Bellotta. When 22-year-old Jake Bellotta's PlayStation disappeared in 2018, he suspected his former roommate, 24-year-old Joshua Barnes, of stealing the console. Barnes had recently been evicted from their apartment in Maitland, Florida for not paying his rent, and Bellotta believed that his ex-roomie had broken back into the unit and stolen the video game system, along with a bong and a marijuana scale. A third roommate, Ian McClurg, would later tell investigators that Bellotta was beyond pissed about the alleged theft and that he had punched a hole in the wall during a fit of rage. Bellotta's anger only grew when he heard that Barnes was supposedly bragging to people about stealing the PlayStation. In addition to being outraged, Bellotta was worried that the talk would inspire others to burglarize his apartment. Intent on getting his PlayStation back, Bellotta devised a plan to lure Barnes to the residence. He invited his former roommate to a made-up event, promising that there would be women there. When Barnes arrived at the apartment, Bellotta stabbed him to death in a frenzied knife attack while McClurg watched. Bellotta and McClurg planned to wrap Barnes's body in garbage bags and remove it from the apartment. But their new roommate unexpectedly arrived home and dialed 911 after discovering the carnage inside. During the call, the roommate told the emergency dispatcher that there was a history of problems between the suspects and the victim, but that he didn't know exactly what had happened because he had just walked in the door. When the dispatcher asked the young man how he knew Barnes was dead, he said that the victim was laying on top of a plastic bag and not moving. He also said that he was afraid that the suspects would do something to harm him and his girlfriend since they were aware of the crime. Thankfully, officers apprehended Bellotta and McClurg before anyone else could get hurt. Bellotta claimed that he killed Barnes in self-defense, but his story didn't hold up in court. He was convicted of murder and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. McClurg pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and tampering with evidence and received a 10-year prison sentence. Number 4. Gruesome gangland execution. Residents in New York City's East Harlem neighborhood were sent running for cover one evening in April of 2023 when a young man was shot in the head at the intersection of East 123rd Street and Lexington Avenue. A local hairdresser named Sochna later told the New York Daily News that she heard around 4 shots. The moment the gunfire broke out, she and other terrified civilians took shelter in the back of her hair salon, where they prayed that no stray bullets would pierce the storefront's glass entrance and strike them in their path. Paramedics rushed the victim, 26-year-old Hector Delgado, to the hospital, but it was too late to save him. Members of the community were left shaken and exasperated by the violence, which some said happens too often. Police arrested the accused shooter, 23-year-old Trevor Gibbs, 3 weeks later. According to prosecutors, Gibbs murdered Delgado as revenge for the point-blank execution 3 days earlier of 19-year-old Jalen Duncan. The slayings came amid an ongoing feud between gangs, and investigators believe that Delgado's murder was also linked to the drug trade. Gibbs faces 1 murder count along with a weapons charge. 5 more suspects were charged in connection with the crime, including 24-year-old Andre Clark, who faces a murder charge. 20-year-old James Figueroa, 21-year-old Ethaniel Coleman, and 25-year-old Ibrahim Ndaya were each charged with 1 count of attempted murder. All 5 of the men and a 6th suspect, 21-year-old Kevin Major, were hit with conspiracy charges. They're being held without bail at Rikers Island while they await the next steps in their cases. Number 3. Robert Manor and Victor Gray. In January 2018, 55-year-old Raymond Wright vanished without a trace from his workplace in Rockland, California. He was never seen again. 2 days after Wright's disappearance, his brother encountered a strange man inside Wright's home. The man fled the scene, leaving behind a drinking cup. About a week after that, Wright's abandoned truck was found, but the missing man himself was nowhere to be found. 5 days later, a man named Victor Gray led police on a chase while intoxicated behind the wheel. When law enforcement caught up with him, they found evidence in his vehicle that they later connected to Wright's case, including a bloody raincoat, Wright's wallet, and several other belongings of his. Meanwhile, a DNA hit from the drinking cup that was left behind at Wright's house turned up as a match to Gray. Investigators also discovered a letter from Gray to a man named Robert Manor, complaining about not receiving a payment for what sounded like a hired hit on Wright. 7 years earlier, Wright had crashed his vehicle drunk, causing serious injuries to Robert Manor and his wife. Wright served prison time for the accident, but his mysterious disappearance and the evidence connecting Manor to the case led detectives to believe that Manor never let go of his grudge against Wright for the crash. In a rare case of authorities pursuing a murder case without a body, prosecutors accused Manor of hiring Gray to murder Wright as revenge for the previous DUI crash. A jury convicted both men of first-degree murder, and they were each sentenced to life in prison without parole. Wright's body remains missing to this day. It's understandable that Manor was upset with Wright for the life-changing consequences of his decision to get behind the wheel drunk, but two wrongs don't make a right, and Manor's refusal to move on from the incident in a healthy and legal way only hurt him more in the end by taking away his freedom. Number 2. Marquis Goodwine. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in July of 2023, 18-year-old Lovell Brown left his home in Sanford, Florida on foot with his mother and several other family members to go buy some snacks. Along their walk to a nearby Circle K convenience store, the family crossed paths with a group of 3 to 4 people who were heading in the opposite direction. According to Brown's mother, Parlett Ramsey, a man from the group approached her son and an altercation broke out between the young men. The fight quickly escalated to blows and then gunshots. In what can only be described as a mother's worst nightmare, Ramsey stood by helplessly as her son collapsed to the ground. A bystander performed CPR in a desperate attempt to revive the young man, but he died from his injuries. Authorities charged the alleged shooter, 18-year-old Marquis Goodwine, with Lovell's murder. Ramsey recognized the suspect as someone her son had gone to high school with. She told investigators that in the months leading up to Lovell's death, she had received phone calls from several of her incarcerated friends, warning her to move her son out of the area for his own safety. The concerned mother initially heeded the warnings and sent Lovell to stay with his sister in California. He moved back to Florida a few months later and tried to keep a low profile, but the threats continued. On the day before Lovell's murder, someone allegedly threw a heavy rock at Ramsey's residence. Just hours before the shooting, Lovell had received a text message from someone who disliked him, challenging him to go outside. He ignored the harassment and stayed at home until the snack run later that night. According to court documents, Goodwine's cousin told police that she tried to persuade him not to go out that evening, because she suspected that he was in a gang and that something bad might happen. Others reported that Goodwine and Brown were entangled in a long-running feud and that Lovell had beaten up his killer in the past. Goodwine had recently served jail time in an unrelated case, and the rivalry continued even after the two men were given some much-needed space from one another. Authorities believe that Goodwine killed Lovell in an act of revenge over their previous run-ins. The suspect is being held without bail as he awaits trial. Number 1. Josue Vasquez. 18-year-old Alyssa Banks was a member of the National Honor Society and the senior class president at her high school in Largo, Maryland. She was looking forward to the next chapter in her life after graduating in 2016. While out on a date with her boyfriend, Deshaun Moore, during the early morning hours a few months later, Alyssa got out of the car to help her beau parallel park. It was just before 2 o'clock in the morning when a group of men approached the couple. A man later identified by law enforcement as 20-year-old Josue Vasquez allegedly opened the door of the car that Alyssa's boyfriend was driving and asked him where he was from. According to authorities, as soon as Moore mentioned that he was from Largo, one of the men opened fire on the couple. Moore survived, but Alyssa died from a gunshot wound to the head. The case went unsolved for 2 years. Finally, in 2018, Vasquez and 2 alleged accomplices, Thomas Jenkins and Daniel Butler, were charged with Alyssa's murder. Prosecutors accused Vasquez of shooting Alyssa to avenge the death of a friend who had been killed at a house party a year earlier. even though neither Alyssa nor her boyfriend were at the house party or involved in the previous killing. Moore reportedly identified Vasquez as the gunman, and a friend of the defendant also claimed that they had overheard him confessing to the crime. Vasquez's co-defendant, Thomas Jenkins, testified in court that on the night of the shooting, he and Vasquez were looking around for anyone who matched the description of someone who had been at the house party a year earlier. Jenkins admitted that he didn't recognize the victims and claimed that the gun he was carrying malfunctioned and didn't fire. Jenkins took a plea deal while the case against Vasquez went to trial. Vasquez's lawyers argued that two of the key witnesses in the case were unreliable. They also claimed that the witnesses' testimony was bought and paid for in exchange for leniency in their own criminal cases. Moreover, there were some alarming discrepancies between Moore's description of the shooter as a black man who was at least 6 feet tall, and Vasquez, a Hispanic man who stands at just 5 feet 7 inches tall. After considering the evidence, the jury acquitted Vasquez, marking an emotional victory for the defense and a heartbreaking disappointment for the victims' families.
12. Christina Lee. The phone call that no family wants to get came to 23-year-old Christina Lee's loved ones during summer 2022. After she was fatally shot inside her home in Pasadena, Texas by her boyfriend. 22-year-old Bobby Wolf said that he heard what sounded like a break-in near the front door at 3 o'clock in the morning. In a tragic mistake that you'll probably see more than once on our list today, he fired his gun in the dark towards what he thought was an intruder, but it was actually Christina, his girlfriend. She was hit by the bullets and she died from her injuries. During the initial aftermath of the tragedy, a spokesperson from the police department told ABC News that Wolf was working closely with law enforcement. At the time, investigators were trying to figure out whether the evidence at the crime scene supported the young man's claim that the shooting was an accident. Christina's family had a much different reaction though. The moment they'd heard of their daughter's death, they immediately turned against the young man, suspecting Wolf of foul play. One relative even claimed that Christina had recently accused Wolf of stalking her everywhere she went, and that she was trying to distance herself from him in the weeks leading up to her death. They were quick to accuse Wolf of making up a story about an intruder as a cover-up for what they suspect was an intentional and deliberate act of violence. After the investigation, authorities officially charged Wolf with manslaughter. He remains in custody to this day on a $250,000 bond while awaiting the next steps in the case. The young child that he and Christina shared together is now being raised by family members, who are now fighting with one another in family court over who should have full custody. 11. Nedeja Jamaica Presley. Not long after 1 a.m. one morning back in May 2019, Jermaine Presley was woken up by the sound of his 23-year-old daughter, Nedeja Jamaica Presley, walking into his Greensboro, North Carolina home. Thinking someone was trying to break in during the middle of the night, he instinctively grabbed his gun from its hiding place and fired 2 shots right as Nedeja was opening the door. The young woman was declared dead at the scene. Nedeja had a key to the house, but news reports have conflicting claims about whether or not she actually lived at the property before her death. According to local news station WYFF4, Nedeja was there to drop off some food she made for her father. Other sources described the property as Nedeja's home, not her dad's. Either way, her father insisted that he didn't mean to shoot her and he definitely didn't mean to kill her. Jermaine Presley was eventually charged with murder despite his claims that the shooting was accidental. He was also charged with numerous weapon and drug-related counts. In a public statement, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office acknowledged that Presley probably didn't think the person opening the door was Nedeja, but the agency believed that he fully intended to kill whoever was on the other side, making it clear that law enforcement planned to see the murder charge go through in court. Family members rallied around Presley in support. They all fully believed in his innocence, unable to think he'd ever intentionally hurt his daughter. They asked the judge for leniency while they grieved Nedeja's death, but Presley was held without bond as the case played out in the system. According to state prison records, he was later convicted of a reduced involuntary manslaughter charge, along with a drug trafficking count and a gun-related offense. he was handed a 7-year sentence and is set to be released in 2025. 10. Alicia Gaston. During the morning, one day in January 2016, 36-year-old Noah Gaston was woken up by what he later described as a sound resembling walkie-talkie static. At the time, his whole family was sleeping inside the home in Windham, Maine, including his wife, 34-year-old Alicia Gaston, and their 3 young children. At about 6:17 a.m., Noah called 911 in a panic and said that he accidentally shot Alicia after mistaking her for an intruder. He fired the fatal shot in the stairwell of the home while quietly following the suspicious noise that first woke him up. There was no burglary taking place on the property. It was just Alicia moving harmlessly about the house, trying not to disturb anyone after pouring her early morning coffee. She passed away from her injuries, and investigators had a boatload of questions for Noah as they tried to determine whether the shooting was really an honest accident like he claimed. One of the first huge red flags came to light when 2 of the Gaston children told police that they overheard their parents fighting that morning, which Noah failed to mention in his telling of events. There were also inconsistencies in the statements he gave to law enforcement. In one recount of what happened, Noah said that Alicia was at the bottom of the stairs when he shot at her, but in another version of the story, he claimed his wife was more toward the middle of the staircase. Meanwhile, the physical evidence suggested that Alicia was actually standing near the top of the stairs when she was struck by the fatal bullet. This meant that she was more than likely just a few feet away from Noah when he decided to pull the trigger, making it difficult to believe his claims. He said that he could only make out a dark silhouette and was unaware that he was shooting his wife. Authorities soon charged Noah Gaston with both murder and manslaughter. He maintained his innocence as the case played out, sticking to his original claim that Alicia got out of bed unusually early that day, and that he mistook her for a home intruder. Prosecutors argued that it actually wasn't a strange time of day for Alicia to be awake, and that Noah should have known as her husband that any noise coming from downstairs was probably just his wife going about her morning routine as usual. They also questioned why Noah didn't bother to check and see if Alicia was in the couple's bed before storming out of the room with a shotgun in his hands and opening fire at the first sign of movement in the house. The state claimed that the Gastons' marriage had started to deteriorate before this incident and that they were financially struggling to make ends meet. At the time of Alicia's murder, she was the family's main breadwinner, while Noah was out of work after quitting his job as a chef. According to Alicia's family members, she was thinking about possibly divorcing Noah. The first trial ended in a mistrial after the medical examiner decided to change some of the findings in their report. Prosecutors retried the case later on, with the updated evidence obtained in 2019. During the proceedings, people were quick to notice a distinct lack of emotion coming from Noah, which emergency responders also observed on the day of the shooting. For someone who just accidentally killed his wife, you'd think he'd be more emotionally invested. In a rare departure from the stone-faced demeanor he upheld throughout the majority of the trial, he broke down in tears while the court played an audio recording of his 911 call. Noah's biggest display of emotion came at the exact moment when he was convicted of murder and handed 40 years in prison. As soon as the guilty verdict was announced, he was seen putting his head down on the table in front of him in disbelief. What initially seemed like despair quickly transitioned into what looked like anger as Noah walked out of court shaking his head in sheer frustration. He later appealed his conviction, but the ruling was upheld. Noah will be 68 years old when his earliest possible chance at parole will come along in the year 2050. 9. Deborah Kelly. When it comes to things that happen behind closed doors and off security cameras, the closest investigators can ever get to knowing the full story is by weighing physical evidence against the narratives given by the people involved in a crime. 48-year-old Debbie Kelly unfortunately didn't survive long enough to tell her side of things after she was fatally shot by her husband of just 2 years, 49-year-old Lars Itzo, in October 2015. Itzo claimed that he was laying in bed at the couple's shared home in San Antonio, Texas, when he was woken up by startling noises. Apparently, not stopping to think that it might just be his wife, he quickly grabbed a shotgun and pulled the trigger the moment he saw a human being inside the house. It wasn't until he'd already fired the first fatal bullet into Debbie's chest and was about to go grab another gun when he heard her moaning out in pain that he realized his mistake. Responding officers got to the home and found Itzo naked, which was unusual for many reasons which should be obvious. He seemed in an extremely distressed state, which was normal considering the horrific circumstances, but law enforcement immediately noticed several things that weren't adding up. At least one officer testified that Itzo's dramatic sobbing display seemed fake and that there were no actual tears coming out of his eyes. His hands also appeared clean, which didn't make much sense for a man who just sat on a phone call with 911 and claimed to be giving his wife chest compressions while she bled out from a gunshot wound the size of a tennis ball. The inconsistencies between Itzo's story and the evidence kept adding up until it was unavoidable. He had no gunshot residue on his hands whatsoever, and there were no bloody footprints around the home, which would have been normal amid the chaos of a loved one getting shot. There were also no blood smears around Debbie's body to suggest that Itzo had actually tried to perform CPR or stop her from bleeding, even though the 911 dispatcher instructed him on how to do both. A lie detector test indicated that he was being untruthful in at least some of his answers to investigators' questions. To law enforcement, Itzo didn't seem like a heartbroken widow who'd done everything in his power to save his wife, and his story about accidentally shooting her seemed equally unbelievable. Authorities later charged Itzo with murder and manslaughter, while he continued to stand by his claim that Debbie's death was an honest and true accident. Some of the couple's friends were 100% certain that Itzo was incapable of killing his wife. Debbie's parents even supported him at first, although that would change as the case unfolded and more details were revealed. Itzo's defense attorney and his supporters were quick to point out that he had no motive for killing Debbie. Their marriage wasn't exactly perfect, but nobody's is. Most importantly, Itzo did not stand to benefit financially in any way from his wife's death. Prosecutors accused the defendant of being fed up with Debbie's independence. As a career woman with a healthy social life, she didn't spend as much time at home as her husband with old-fashioned standards might expect. In the eyes of the state, Itzo wanted more out of Debbie than what he was getting, and he eventually reached a breaking point. Those who doubted Itzo's innocence also didn't fully understand how he failed to recognize his own wife, as she was standing right in front of him before he made the fateful decision to shoot. Many also thought it was strange that Itzo didn't check to see if Debbie was still in bed, or if she'd gotten up, which would have easily explained any of the so-called noises he was hearing. The jury also struggled to reach a consensus. At one point, they were deadlocked, but the judge told them to keep working toward an answer until a decision was made. They ultimately acquitted Itzo of murder and convicted him of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. 8. Karl Polak. After getting behind schedule one day in June 2023, professional pool cleaner Karl Polak showed up at a client's house in Dunedin, Florida, a few hours later than originally planned. In many cases, this isn't really that big of a deal, but he failed to tell the homeowners that he was running late. So, when 43-year-old Jana Hocevar saw Polak in her backyard during the evening hours and didn't recognize who he was, the day took an almost catastrophic turn. Since Polak usually stopped by during the afternoon, Jana didn't stop to consider that it might be him just stopping by to do a job. The concerned homeowner informed her husband, 57-year-old Bradley Hocevar, to the so-called random person on their property, who was now walking around the couple's home. They called 911, and in the meantime, Bradley yelled multiple times and ordered Polak to go away. When the pool cleaner didn't hear the warnings amid the noise from his cleaning equipment and continued going about his work, Hocevar decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed his AR-15 rifle and fired 2 shots through the sliding glass door, aiming in the direction of Polak's flashlight, which to Bradley seemed like an obvious sign of a burglar lurking outside. Polak was hit by some of the broken glass, but otherwise managed to escape the barrage bullets safely. Still, under the impression that an intruder was walking around in his yard, Bradley continued firing away, discharging over 30 rounds in just a minute and a half. Florida is both loved and hated for its lax gun laws, which lean heavily in favor of a person's right to defend themselves and their property with lethal force if necessary. Deputies concluded that Bradley Hocevar was acting lawfully when he decided to shoot through his screen door and pelt his backyard full of dozens of bullets, so no arrests were made. In the words of Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, it was lawful but awful. And it's probably safe to assume that going forward, Polak will warn his customers in advance from now on when he's running late, or at least tell them that he's there before cleaning their pool. 7. Mario Balotelli. In 2011, Italian soccer player Mario Balotelli was kicked out of the mansion he was renting in Cheshire, England, after his friends lit fireworks in the bathroom, causing a small house fire in the middle of the night. Luckily, nobody was hurt from this, but the home was too damaged to keep living inside. This is just one of dozens of crazy things that Balotelli has made headlines for during his career. He pops up in the news fairly frequently for his strange and sometimes funny behavior, which includes trespassing into a women's prison, amassing tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid parking tickets despite having the money to pay for them, getting his team eliminated from a game by karate kicking an opponent, and confronting a little boy's bully after the child approached him on the street. A few weeks after the blaze, Balotelli returned to the property to collect a few of his electronics. He was with a friend that day, and when neighbors saw the men loading things into their car, they assumed the pair were burglars, even though Balotelli had recently lived there. Ironically, he was accused of breaking into his own house. Police were called to the scene, but the misunderstanding was quickly taken care of, unlike some of the chaotic situations Balotelli's found himself in over the years. 6. Valerie Munoz. While responding to a reported shooting during one morning in August 2021, police officers found 52-year-old Valerie Munoz suffering from a gunshot wound at her Pueblo, Colorado home. According to several police documents, she told officers that her husband, 64-year-old Albert Luis Rodriguez, shot her in the back after she got out of bed and went to sit in another room. Munoz died a few hours later from her injuries. Rodriguez told investigators that he mistook his wife for an intruder. But these claims were challenged by an autopsy report, which revealed that Valerie had to have been shot from somewhere between 6 inches and 3 feet away. By then, Rodriguez had already admitted that he and Munoz were having some marital issues. Valerie's adult daughters offered further insight into the strained relationship, which included frequent arguments and allegations of Rodriguez lashing out in acts of drug-fueled violence against their mother. He also allegedly held resentment toward Munoz for not contributing more financially to their shared household. Munoz made plans to leave Rodriguez just 5 months before her death, and she almost followed through. Sadly, she changed her mind and went back to him. A drug test revealed that Rodriguez had meth in his system at the time of the shooting. As detectives conducted more interviews and combed the scene for evidence, they quickly uncovered other aspects of the situation that weren't adding up. Rodriguez said that the house was pitch dark when he shot Munoz and that all the lights were off. But the victim's daughter said that her mother usually left some lights on at night to avoid tripping and falling after getting a knee replacement. And, if needed, she would use a flashlight to make sure she could clearly see where she was going. So, it makes no sense for Rodriguez to say that the shooting happened in complete darkness. Authorities later charged him with second-degree murder, which carries a sentence of up to 48 years. In early 2023, Rodriguez pleaded guilty to a reduced reckless manslaughter charge. He was sentenced to just 4 years in prison, but could be eligible for parole after serving less than a year behind bars. 5. Mark Woods. In 2008, 58-year-old Edwin Pitkin woke up in the middle of the night to someone breaking into his London home. Suspecting that he was getting robbed, Pitkin immediately picked up a knife and went to confront whoever was at the door while his wife dialed 911. He wasn't wrong about someone trying to break in, but he was unaware that the intruder was actually his neighbor, 32-year-old Mark Woods, who lived just 4 doors down. The man was so drunk that he was trying to go inside the wrong house. Pitkin opened the door and came face to face with Woods, who was convinced that he was locked outside of his own home. Woods allegedly threatened to gouge Pitkin's eyes out with some keys he was holding. During a brief scuffle that ensued, Pitkin stabbed Woods in the chest. The confused neighbor died from his injuries at the scene. While responding to the incident, police officers told Pitkin that he could possibly face criminal charges for stabbing Woods. The news came as a shock to other neighbors, who described Pitkin as quiet and friendly. Pitkin decided to hire a lawyer just in case. The attorney told the press that his client was devastated by the outcome of the fatal encounter. After an investigation, the Crown Prosecution Service concluded that there was not enough evidence to dispute Pitkin's claim that he acted in self-defense. The findings ruled that Pitkin behaved reasonably considering the circumstances, and he was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing. 4. John Genter. Early one morning back in 2001, 28-year-old Felicia Genter and her husband, 35-year-old John Genter, were woken up by a sudden noise at their mobile home in Pasco, Florida. They quickly got out of bed to investigate, and John picked up 2 handguns, one for himself and one for Felicia. He told his wife to stay inside the bedroom with the door locked while he went outside to check things out. A few minutes after John left, Felicia heard the front door open again. She saw a shadow under the bedroom door and called out her husband's name twice. When John didn't answer, Felicia pointed her 9mm pistol toward the door and fired 6 rounds. But it was actually John standing on the other side of the door, and unfortunately, one of the bullets fatally struck him in the chest. By all appearances, the tragic shooting looked like an honest mistake. Neither Felicia nor John had past criminal records, and there were no signs that anything was majorly wrong with their relationship. Family and friends spoke highly of the two, and neighbors described them as polite and quiet. While it could be reasonably argued that Felicia was too quick to pull the trigger, police officers declined to file criminal charges. John's death came just after the couple celebrated their son's birthday. Thankfully, the little boy was at his grandparents' house when the shooting took place. Felicia's father, Kenneth Martin, told the Tampa Bay Times that his daughter and John were married for about 5 years before the accident. He said the couple seemed happy together, but pointed toward their remote location along a dirt road as a possible driving factor in the case, stating, "When you're isolated like this, you tend to operate on fear a lot." 3. Ben Samphire. After earning a PhD for human cognitive evolution in 2009, 31-year-old British conservationist Ben Samphire went to Ecuador to conduct research on a rare species of monkey. The project was tragically cut short when Samphire was fatally shot in the back near a coastal village about 100 miles west of Quito. At the time of the killing, Samphire and a colleague were out in the wilderness observing wildlife and taking photographs. There was initially no outward motive for the seemingly unprovoked murder. During a manhunt for the suspect, members of law enforcement told the press that they thought Samphire may have unknowingly strayed onto private property and been mistaken as a trespasser by the landowner. And because Samphire and his colleague were taking pictures, the owner might have mistaken them for intruders trying to take over his land. Samphire was one of the most highly respected members of his field, and it's heartbreaking that he didn't get a chance to pursue his career further or do any of the other things he wanted to experience. His friends and fellow scholars were shattered by the news, and his mother was too grief-stricken to even speak with the media. Unfortunately, no suspect was ever arrested in the case, and the person's reasons for shooting at Samphire will most likely never be revealed. 2. Scott Copeland. It was only natural that 85-year-old Curtis Copeland was worried when he heard movement outside the front door of his Arkadelphia, Arkansas home around 4 o'clock in the morning, one day back in October 2019. After all, it's not exactly a normal time of day for a visitor to swing by. Suspecting that someone was trying to break in and rob him, Copeland grabbed a gun and went out to investigate. When he opened his front door, he quickly realized that the person standing there was his son, 45-year-old Scott Copeland, but the gun still accidentally discharged, fatally striking Scott in the chest. Police described the tragedy as a genuine accident. There were no major problems between the father and son, and Curtis was devastated by Scott's death. While authorities declined to go into detail about why Scott was at his dad's house, an investigation ruled that no crimes had been committed. Curtis died just 10 months later at the age of 86. 1. Colleen Hoops. In yet another case of someone overreacting to a noise coming from another room, 36-year-old Christopher Hoops fired his gun twice from his bed after being startled awake at his Tempe, Arizona home in 2022. He called 911 at 3:30 a.m. after realizing that he shot his wife, 25-year-old professional ballet dancer Colleen Hoops. The young woman died from 2 bullet injuries to the chest despite doctors' efforts to save her. Surveillance footage from a close neighbor's house captured the sounds of the 2 gunshots, which happened just 2 seconds apart from each other. This and other evidence helped investigators piece together what they believe took place leading up to the shooting, but for now, they're releasing very few details to the public. Christopher Hoops is currently facing a second-degree murder charge, along with 1 count of discharging a firearm within city limits. He's made very few statements to the police before lawyering up, and has been fighting the case head-on every step of the way. Hailing from Rochester, New York, Colleen Hoops rose to some of the most prestigious ranks of the ballet profession during her short life. She joined the Arizona Ballet Company in 2017 and participated in almost a dozen performances before her untimely death. At the time of her death, she'd been married to Christopher Hoops for about 2 years. There have been no recent updates on this case, which seems to be dragging its heels through the court system. But the details of what happened and why are bound to come out eventually.
Number 9. Hit-and-run driver strikes again. 3 TikTokers in Westminster, Colorado had their cameras rolling from different angles when they captured footage of the aftermath of a multi-car hit-and-run in April 2023. In the videos, a woman could be seen exiting from the driver's side of a silver car that had rammed into a pickup truck. She walked calmly from the scene until the driver of the pickup truck opened his door and began exiting the vehicle, at which point the woman picked up the pace and ran. One of the TikTokers, Natalie Sandoval, chased after the suspect and jokingly asked if she wanted a ride. The woman briefly turned around and said, "For real, let's go," only to quickly turn around and continue running away. A victim at the crime scene suffered a broken arm. The 21-year-old suspect was captured nearly 2 months later, thanks to a civilian who followed her in their car and informed police of her whereabouts. As it turned out, she had a warrant out for her arrest in connection with another crash that had occurred back in 2020. In addition to booking her on a second hit-and-run charge for the most recent incident, authorities cited her for numerous traffic violations. Number 8. Stanley Eric Mossberg. One evening in October 2019, 911 dispatchers in Polk County, Florida, received a call from a man who said an unknown suspect had barged into his home, killed his 2 roommates, and held him captive for 14 hours. The victim said he came home from work the previous night to find the suspect there. A male roommate had already been murdered, while a female roommate was tied up and still alive. She told the man to cooperate with the suspect to avoid getting hurt. The captor, later identified as a wanted fugitive from Greenville, Tennessee, named Stanley Eric Mossberg, tied the 3rd victim up in a separate room. Throughout the night, Mossberg filled luggage with all 3 victims' belongings. At one point, he killed the female victim and told the lone surviving resident about it. During the early afternoon, Mossberg told the man he would be back to deal with the dead bodies. He threatened to kill the man if he called the police and fled the scene in the female victim's car. The terrified survivor waited 5 hours before running to a neighbor who dialed 911. Police located the house where they believed Mossberg was hiding out and spent the night trying to negotiate with him using a PA system. They tried forcing Mossberg to surrender by filling the home with a chemical agent, but he refused and repeatedly shot at the team. Early the next morning, a SWAT armored vehicle drove into the garage where Mossberg was hiding under a pool table, and a K-9 apprehended him. In addition to the first-degree murder charge he was wanted on out of Tennessee, Mossberg was hit with 16 counts in Florida, including murder, attempted murder of a police officer, armed burglary with assault, resisting arrest with violence, and more. He remains behind bars in Florida amid numerous trial delays. Number 7. Lucifer Nguyen. By the time police responded to a call about an armed home invasion in Mendota Heights, Minnesota one morning in 2017, the suspect had fled the scene. Later identified as 44-year-old Lucifer Nguyen, the intruder robbed a homeowner at gunpoint and sped off in a white sedan. When an officer tried pulling the car over, Nguyen initially appeared to cooperate, but he stepped on the gas and managed to elude capture. The car was later found in a pond, but Nguyen was not in it. Shortly after finding the vehicle, police received a call about an armed gunman at a senior living facility located very close to the pond. It was in the same direction that a witness had reported seeing Nguyen running in after he crashed the car. He had forced his way into the building at gunpoint and fatally shot 48-year-old Beverly Corey, and he fled the scene in her car before police could get to him. Later that morning, he knocked on a stranger's door and asked for a ride to a casino, and he also bought a cell phone at Walmart. Authorities finally captured Nguyen shortly before midnight. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and 2 counts of aggravated robbery, and was sentenced to more than 45 years in prison, with a minimum of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. Number 6. John McCluskey. In July 2010, inmates Tracy Allen Province and John McCluskey escaped from a state prison in Kingman, Arizona, with help from McCluskey's girlfriend, Caslin May Welsh. A few days later, the trio allegedly carjacked Oklahoma couple Gary and Linda Haas at a rest stop along Interstate 40 in New Mexico. McCluskey, who was serving a 43-year sentence for attempted murder at the time of the escape, fatally shot the couple. He and Province then drove to a remote area and set Gary and Linda's trailer on fire with their bodies inside. According to federal authorities, McCluskey committed multiple other kidnappings during his time on the run. Police discovered the Haas's charred remains 5 days after the escape. 4 days later, they captured Province. Another 10 days after that, McCluskey and Welsh were apprehended, bringing the nationwide 20-day manhunt to an end. McCluskey had a lengthy criminal history spanning multiple states, which included prior convictions for at least 2 counts of aggravated assault with a firearm, 4 armed robberies, kidnapping, escape, and more. At the end of his 4-month trial for the multi-state crime spree following the 2010 escape, a federal judge found him guilty on all 20 counts listed in his indictment. He was sentenced to life in prison after the jury was unable to unanimously agree on whether or not to recommend the death penalty. McCluskey died in prison in 2017 after serving just a handful of years for his most recent batch of crimes. He had been in poor health for several years leading up to his death, which was attributed to natural causes. Number 5. Christopher Prey. Described by police as an extremely dangerous felon, 39-year-old Christopher Prey bolted from a psychiatric hospital in Salem, Oregon, while fully shackled in August 2023. His handcuffs were attached to a belly chain, and his legs were also chained when he slipped out of the hospital unnoticed and sped off in a stolen minivan. A high-speed chase followed as state troopers tried to catch up with and disable the vehicle, but the police eventually decided to pull out of the pursuit for safety reasons. While considering the next move, the agency warned the public not to approach Prey and to dial 911 immediately in the event of a sighting. The fleeing fugitive has at least 16 felony convictions under his belt, including for robbery, resisting arrest, being a felon in possession of a weapon, and smuggling contraband into prison. At the time of his escape, Prey was being detained on multiple pending charges in connection with an incident that occurred in early 2022, including attempted aggravated murder, robbery, assault, and a gun charge. He's accused of nearly killing a woman during a robbery and attacking another woman with a tool during a domestic dispute. After being found incompetent to stand trial days before the escape, Prey was admitted to a state hospital where he got into an altercation with another patient. Following his escape, he was found stuck in mud up to his armpits in a pond. He allegedly gave police a false name, but was quickly identified by a hospital employee who recognized him and called law enforcement. Photos and videos showed fire personnel standing on a ladder and fishing prey out of the pond using ropes. Authorities have not revealed exactly how Prey escaped custody, but have reassured the public that an investigation is underway. Number 4. Stuart Pinkham. 33-year-old Stuart Pinkham was wanted out of South Haven, Mississippi for carjacking, kidnapping, aggravated assault, and evading arrest when he allegedly went on a violent crime spree in Memphis, Tennessee in early 2023. According to police, he committed 2 shootings over a 2-day period in March, seriously wounding one victim and killing another. During the first incident, a woman claiming to be Pinkham's girlfriend was shot in the eye while sitting in her car and talking to a friend. She told police that Pinkham then yanked her out of the car and fled the scene of the vehicle. The next day, a witness called 911 and reported seeing a man shot in the chest outside a residence. As the victim ran toward the house, the shooter fired several more times. Multiple law enforcement agencies worked together to locate and apprehend Pinkham, including a U.S. Marshals Violent Fugitive Task Force. 2 days after the second shooting, the team tracked the fugitive to a local residence and surrounded the home. Thankfully, he surrendered without incident. In addition to the charges out of Mississippi, he now faces 1 count each of murder, attempted second-degree murder, and possession of a firearm with the intent to commit a felony. He faces 2 counts each of attempted first-degree murder, being a felon in possession of a firearm, aggravated assault, and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. Number 3. Ernesto Alfredo Piñon de la Cruz. On New Year's Day 2023, 30 inmates violently escaped from a prison in Juarez, Mexico, near the United States border. The breakout was carried out with help from people on the outside, who stormed the prison with an armored vehicle and shot at guards. 10 officers, 7 inmates, and 2 attackers died in the ensuing chaos, while 13 others were injured. Among those who fled the prison was notorious Los Mexicles cartel leader Ernesto Alfredo Piñon de la Cruz. Better known by his street name El Neto, authorities considered him to be the leader of the breakout. He had been locked up for 12 years at the time of the escape. Piñon was first identified as a dangerous organized criminal in 2007, when he was just 18 years old. In 2010, he was sentenced to 224 years in prison for homicide and kidnapping. 3 days after the escape, Chihuahua State Police tracked the kingpin to a residence in the Los Aztecas neighborhood of Juarez. They attempted to take the gang leader into custody during the pre-dawn hours, but were shot at from inside the residence. Piñon fled the scene in a vehicle and drove to a nearby gas station where he crashed the car and continued to shoot at police. Officers returned fire, striking Piñon several times. El Neto was critically injured, but police were worried that taking him to an emergency room would make the hospital a target for the Mexicles. They opted instead to take him to a police station, and he died on the way there. Police seized an armored car, 8 rifles, and 5 bulletproof vests from the crime scene. But the chaos didn't end with Piñon's death. In retaliation for the loss of their leader, Mexicles members set fire to a convenience store and multiple vehicles. Number 2. Floyd Ray Cook. During what began as a normal traffic stop in Allgood, Tennessee in 2005, 62-year-old Floyd Ray Cook shot and wounded a police officer. Cook was a seasoned criminal. At the time of the traffic stop, he was wanted in Marion County, Kentucky for failing to register as an offender in connection with a past assault case. He was also wanted in Hardin County, Kentucky for trafficking methamphetamine and tampering with evidence. After shooting the officer in Allgood, Floyd fled in his pickup truck. He was spotted about an hour later just over the Kentucky border in rural Cumberland County. When a state trooper tried to pull him over, he attempted to speed off and wrecked his truck. Floyd fled on foot, sparking a major manhunt along the Kentucky-Tennessee border. Residents remained on edge as law enforcement searched high and low. Schools canceled classes for 3 days in a row, while entire communities waited for life to return to normal. A few days into the search, an investigator spotted a car Cook was thought to be traveling in outside a gas station in White House, Tennessee. When a marshal approached, the driver tried to flee, hitting 2 cop cars in the process and narrowly missing an officer on foot. Police fired at the car, which sped off down a street and through a fence. It crashed in a ravine, and and the occupants ran off into a nearby cornfield. They were later identified as two of Cook's associates, but Cook himself was not in the car. A week into the manhunt, state troopers and a federal marshal encountered the fugitive while searching an embankment in Burkesville, Kentucky. Instead of cooperating, Cook shot at law enforcement and they returned fire. Cook was killed in the shootout, bringing his chaotic run from the law to a harrowing end. Number 1. Escaped prisoners die in car crash. In November 2020, 69 pre-trial detainees escaped a detention center in Babda, Lebanon, on the outskirts of Beirut. The mass jailbreak occurred despite tight security when inmates broke open their cell doors and attacked guards. During the large-scale manhunt that ensued, 5 inmates were killed when the stolen car they were fleeing in crashed. The driver lost control of the vehicle, which was traveling at a high speed, and the car struck a tree. One survivor was taken to the hospital with injuries. Speaking to the news outlet AFP, prosecutor Ghada Aoun said that an investigation into the breakout was underway and that authorities had not ruled out the possibility of inmates colluding with guards. The escape reportedly came on the heels of riots inside overcrowded Lebanese jails over the dangers of the COVID-19 virus. Families of inmates had also expressed discontent by staging sit-in protests outside detention facilities. In addition to the 5 prisoners who died in the car crash, authorities recaptured 15 escapees and 4 turned themselves in. As of February 2021, the remaining 44 inmates were still at large. Thanks for watching. Would you rather live near a prison that seems to have a problem with inmates escaping, or near a garbage dump that you can smell from your house on a hot summer day? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.